As if 2020 and 2021 were not unpredictable and challenging enough, 2022 proved to be a more eventful year. From the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic to worsening climate change, from the Russia-Ukraine conflict to worldwide inflation and energy shortage, now it's time to think about what to expect in 2023. In this episode, we are going to be more specific and discuss the economic performance of the world's largest economy to be China. Our distinguished guest for this interview is Willie Li, Chief Economist at the Milken Institute. Prior to joining the Milken Institute, Willie Li was Managing Director and Head of North American Economics for Citi Group. Before Citi, Li was Deputy Division Chief at the International Monetary Fund. Here's the interview. Welcome to Global Vision. Thanks for joining us in the show.
Don, thank you so much for inviting me. I think it's a pleasure and privilege to be here and to be able not just to talk to you, but also to your audience in Chongqing and Chengdu and your global audience as well.
How do you rate China's economy 2022 on a scale of 1 to 10? Which aspect of this economy has impressed you the most, Bill?
I think China has developed its potential phenomenally. It's done a fantastic job of becoming the world's second largest economy from very humble beginnings. Deng Xiaoping introduced market forces into the Chinese economy. And this was really instrumental in transforming China from an emerging market status to its current, global second largest economy status. And the Chinese leadership has since Deng Xiaoping carried forward these market reforms, and they've been very successful in adapting development models to fit the needs of China's socialist system. And one of the most important highlights about this adaptation is the process of what's known as decentralized development. It's allowed provincial governments an enormous amount of regional autonomy. Experimentation that supports innovation has highlighted the successes for China. And it's a very important ingredient for China's overall success, the idea of experimentation. After all, it was Deng Xiaoping who said, you cross the river by touching the stones very carefully. Even though it's the same around the world in the sense that it's high and rising prices, in the United States, the main reason for the high and rising prices is because people are spending more than there's an available supply of goods and services. There's much more money for people to spend than there is goods and services. In Europe and in many emerging market economies, we find that inflation comes from supply shortages that have come about because of the war in Ukraine and Russia and the shortages of energy and food that have resulted from that. And for China has been very fortunate in that COVID policies have restricted domestic demand during the lockdowns, and China's enormous manufacturing capacity still gives a lot of room for producing as much as needed without having to raise prices. So that's really, I think, one of the main reasons why China has really been in this very fortunate position of not experiencing the huge blow up in prices that we've seen around the world. I think, and most analysts believe, the real estate sector is critical for China's growth prospects. Most citizens rely on the property holdings to be a store of wealth. And really the reason for that is because there's so few alternatives for saving money safely. And one of the great needs, I think, for the Chinese people is to expand the range of safe investment assets in which households can diversify their wealth. But the post-COVID reopening by itself is probably not going to bring back property prices and reassure people that their wealth is safe. There's going to have to be some fundamental regulatory reforms that the 20th Party Congress has pointed out that have to be put in place to restore confidence that homes and apartments are a stable source of wealth. There are very few people now who are confident, as far as I can see in China, that the new homes will be built as promised. And many families are worried that their children are not going to have jobs because the youth unemployment rate is so high. So many parents are reserving part of their saving to help their children. So I think one of the things that will be critical, as I said, for the success of the post-COVID recovery is to get the real estate sector back into a fundamental soundness again. Strategy up until now has focused on pushing investment spending, especially public infrastructure projects like high-speed rails and major waterwork projects, which you, of course, are very familiar with in your region, the Three Gorges Dam. This was appropriate for China's very early development stages because China was poor in capital, poor in infrastructure, and needed these infrastructure projects to allow China to grow. But in the last decade or so, last 10 years, China has shown signs that the imbalance between investment and consumption is starting to strain on growth, and it's one of the problems that need to be addressed. I don't know if you know, but consumption in China is only about 55% of GDP, gross domestic product. And that compares with, say, 70% to 80% in most developed countries. And I think the leadership has recognized this, as I keep referring to President Xi's speech because it was just so wide-ranging, but the speech following the Economic Work Conference, he emphasized that there's now a need to boost the private sector, especially private consumption. So it's likely that policies that would be coming out from the central government as well as the provincial governments will be to direct funds into the private sector and improve China's capabilities in strategic industries as well. And so we're going to have private consumption being boosted, and we're going to have private investment being boosted in areas that are very important to China, like artificial intelligence, biotech, aerospace, electric vehicles. Part of that is because it has an enormous domestic market that's underdeveloped in terms of producing high value-added goods and services. And now that China has progressed beyond its emerging market status, is no longer the place that people go for low-cost labor. As the second largest economy in the world, and China has now become leaders in the production of many advanced high value-added goods. And investors are reshaping their investments to adapt to China's new status. So instead of focusing, as I said, on low-cost manufacturing and looking at China as just a hub for that kind of manufacturing, it's now being regarded as a source of innovation as well as an advanced production hub. It's not just the United States that have sanctioned countries, but Western countries, the global economy as a whole, has used sanctions as a way of trying to incentivize good behavior. And I think when you think about why it is that the United States and the Euro and other countries are able to do that, it's because countries achieve international status because of their extensive trade and payments network. People use dollars for trade. But back in the 19th century and early 20th century, the British pound was the key reserve currency because the UK had the most extensive trade and financial flows among the countries in the British Empire. And since then, of course, the dollar has displaced the British pound. But if you look forward, I think we're going to be expanding the reserve currency status to many other countries as becoming the preferred vehicle for trade and for financial flows. For example, the euro is used almost exclusively for intra-European trade within Europe, and it's displaced national currencies like the Deutschmark, the German mark, and the French franc, and Italian lira. Those no longer exist because that common currency, the euro, has become a reserve currency for them. I think international use of the renminbi will grow very quickly because China also has grown its trade network very rapidly across several continents, especially the countries that are being touched by the Belt and Road Initiative. Also, China's innovations in using the digital renminbi, and which has been very successful in lowering the cost of international payments and settlement, has become a major force propelling the use of the renminbi in global finance and in global remittances. So I think the future going forward, we're going to see many currencies being used as an international medium of exchange besides the dollar, and the renminbi is going to play a very prominent role among that constellation of currencies. The COVID restrictions and difficulties in the property market have dampened consumer confidence considerably. So policy measures such as those implied by President Xi are very welcome. He has tried to emphasize the importance of boosting consumption, especially during this period as you're coming out of the COVID restrictions, because there are going to be a lot of disruptions put in place. And China needs to put in place policies, which it's apparently going to do from all the speeches I've heard, to stabilize the property market, to address youth unemployment. So the measures that are being talked about are exactly the right ones that are needed to stabilize wealth, stabilize family income, and to be able to build confidence that people will be able to spend again. The use of consumption subsidies by a lot of the regional governments, I think it's been a great plan to reduce the economic shortfall that comes from the COVID lockdowns, and has been successfully used by countries in the West. The important thing to remember, though, is to limit the size of the subsidies, and they should go not just to people, but also to businesses that have been shut down as well. They should be large enough to get closed businesses to reopen and to allow unemployed workers to regain purchasing power. But the mistake that was made by the West, and especially the United States, was to pay out way too much in the way of subsidies after the reopening. And that has been the major cause of the inflation that we're experiencing in the US now. But given what we see in China so far, the use of these consumption subsidies by state and local governments and provincial governments is certainly a very necessary ingredient to a successful reopening in the post-COVID environment. It's a very healthy sign to see low value-added companies move to other countries and other locations as China itself moves up the value-added production chain. President Xi and the leadership have proposed several programs, one of them 10 years ago, I think, that's Made in China 2025. And by now, we see that these programs have started to bear fruit in elevating China's productive capacities and productive capabilities and moving China up the value-added chain. Some firms leave, but those firms will be replaced by either domestic companies that are doing more valuable production, or by new foreign ventures that will contribute to GDP at a very higher value-added point than we saw before. So it'll also be up to the provincial governments and leaders to compete for these new firms, to locate in their cities and bring these high value-added jobs, high-paying jobs to them. And that's going to be the challenge, I think, that the leadership is going to be faced in all of the provinces. If it just goes about doing the normal economic fundamentals, that is addressing the imbalances in the economy, which they're doing to try to push consumption up, push up the private sector, to promote innovation, and to allow experimentation as incentivized by the marketplace. One of the biggest mistakes made by governments around the world, and historically, whether it's Japan, Singapore, countries in Europe, is that governments over-direct the investment incentives. The market forces should be allowed to work. And I think the more you allow the markets to work, you'll see an enormous payoff in terms of local government revenues, local government wage growth, and the economic well-being of the people in their cities. I was very, very honest when I said my mother was very embarrassed when I did not become an aerospace engineer. And it wasn't until I got to Hong Kong. I have a cousin who's married to a doctor there, and she told my mother, look, your son is not a businessman, right? Because I guess I couldn't translate economics into what she could understand. So she thought I was just a businessman, a business major. And so she said to me, who would hire you to be a manager, right? You don't know how to run a business. You don't have any money. Why would anybody hire you? How can you not be an engineer? So when my cousin, when I finally lived in Hong Kong and I opened up the IMF office there, and I started going on TV in Hong Kong, the supermarket checkout lady would say to my mother, "Oh, I saw your son on TV." and then my cousin would tell her, "You know, your son is not a businessman. He deals with, you know, the top central banker and the top finance ministers and around the world. So it really is a very high position." And then she finally realized, she said to me, "Oh, okay, I guess you have an okay job. I don't have to worry about you anymore."